Don't take your evening medication, Mr. Hallowell. Please. Chester Hallowell was 6 steps down the corridor when the voice reached him. Quiet, careful, and completely out of place coming from a boy who couldn't have been older than 11. Chester turned around. The boy was standing near the maintenance cart outside room 114, holding a small flathead screwdriver in one hand and a work order form in the other, looking at Chester with eyes that were steady in a way that reminded him of seasoned witnesses on a stand. The kind who don't embellish. The kind who say exactly what they saw and then stop. "Excuse me," Chester said. "Your evening medication," the boy repeated. "Don't take it tonight. Something's wrong with the bottles." Chester Hallowell had spent 34 years as founding partner at Hallowell & Greer, one of the oldest commercial litigation firms in Philadelphia. He had cross-examined CEOs, federal witnesses, and a sitting judge who had made the mistake of moonlighting as an expert consultant. He could read a room faster than most people could read a menu. But standing in the hallway of a rehabilitation center at 4:30 in the afternoon, 12 days into his recovery from a moderate ischemic stroke, he mostly felt tired. His right hand still drifted slightly when he reached for things. His thoughts, usually crisp and sequential, sometimes arrived in the wrong order. He was 62 years old, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt like it. He looked at the boy for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Jonah." "Jonah, does your father work here?" "Yes, sir. He's the facilities technician. He's fixing the electrical panel in the laundry room. He brought me because my school is on break this week." Chester glanced down the corridor. The nursing station was visible at the far end, 2 nurses talking behind the desk. No one was paying attention to either of them. He looked back at Jonah. The boy had not moved. He had not looked away. He was holding that screwdriver with the practiced grip of a child who had grown up around tools, and his expression had not changed. Not impatient, not anxious, not performing, just waiting. "Tell me what you saw," Chester said. "I was sitting in the chair outside your room," Jonah said. "My dad told me to wait there while he went to his truck to get a part. Someone came out of your room. She was wearing green scrubs like the staff here. But she didn't have a badge. I always check the badges because my dad says in a place like this, you have to know who belongs where." He paused. She had a bag, a small black bag, zipper across the top. She walked fast to the stairwell at the end of the hall, not the elevator, the stairs. And she wasn't here before. "I've been sitting in that chair since 2 o'clock. I notice people." Chester stood very still. He told himself the boy was a child, that children saw things out of context, that staff occasionally misplaced their badges, that scrubs were practically a uniform for half the world these days. He told himself several reasonable things in a row. Then, despite all of them, he turned and walked back to room 114. His evening medication was arranged on the small tray beside the sink, the way it always was, 3 bottles and a paper cup of water. Everything looked exactly as it should. He picked up the middle bottle, the one containing his blood thinner, and turned it over in his hand. The label was correct. The color of the pills was right. The seal had already been broken 9 days ago when he'd started the prescription, so the open cap meant nothing on its own. He set it down. Then he picked it up again. Because something was wrong, and it took him 10 more seconds to locate it. The lot number printed along the lower edge of the label was slightly blurred, the way labels look when they have been removed and reprinted rather than pressed cleanly at manufacturing. He had spent 34 years examining documents. He knew exactly what that looked like. He sat down on the edge of the bed. Outside in the hallway, Jonah was still standing by the maintenance cart, still holding the screwdriver. Chester did not press the call button right away. He sat for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to arrange what he knew the way he arranged evidence before presenting it to a jury, logically, without letting emotion get ahead of fact. Someone had been in his room, without a badge, left through the stairs. His medication label had been reprinted. He pressed the call button. Within 7 minutes, he had spoken to the charge nurse, who had gone pale by the second sentence, and to the facility director, Dr. Camille Rourke, who arrived in street clothes because she had just returned from a site visit. She was a woman in her mid-50s with short silver hair and a manner that was direct in the way Chester respected. She did not say the things that would make him feel better. She said the things that were true. "We're pulling the bottle," she said. "Nothing else in that room gets touched until we've documented it. And I need the keycard access logs for this floor. Every entry for the past 5 hours." Chester looked toward the door. Jose was standing just inside the threshold, now his father beside him. A tall man in his 40s with a Meridian Facilities badge on his chest, and the expression of someone who had just realized something serious had happened in the building he was responsible for keeping safe. "Leon Favre," the man said, extending his hand to Chester. "My son found you." "Your son may have saved my life," Chester said. "Mr. Favre, I need to ask Jonah a few more questions. Is that all right?" Leon looked at his son the way parents look at children when they are seeing them clearly for the first time in a while. He nodded. Chester turned back to Jonah. "The woman you saw, tell me everything you remember." Jonah described her with the kind of specific, unsentimental detail that made Chester's chest go tight. White woman, around 40, medium height, dark hair pulled back, a small scar along the right side of her jaw. Jonah had noticed it because she had turned her head sharply when she came out of the room, as though checking whether the hallway was clear. She had looked directly at Jonah for about 1 second, then looked away. She had walked fast, but not running. "She saw you," Chester said. "Yes, sir." "And she still left." "Yes, sir." Jonah met his eyes steadily. "I think she figured I was just a kid." Chester was quiet for a moment. "She was right about that," he said. "She was wrong about what it meant." The lab results came back at 7:52 that evening. Dr. Rourke delivered them herself, standing in the doorway of the room Chester had been moved to. A different room 3 doors down, not entered into the public assignment system. Only Dr. Rourke and 2 nurses knew where he was. "The blood thinner was replaced," she said. "The substitute compound is chemically similar in appearance, but in combination with your current anticoagulation regimen and your cardiac history, it would have induced a hypercoagulable state. Likely within 72 hours. She stopped. "A clot. Fast forming. Given where you are in your recovery, it would almost certainly have presented as a second stroke." "And a second stroke in a recovering patient," Chester said, "would be consistent with the natural course of events," Dr. Rourke finished. No one would have questioned it. Chester turned to the window. The parking lot outside was half empty. A few cars moved slowly toward the exit as the evening shift ended. Somewhere out there, a woman with a scar on her jaw was waiting for her phone to ring. He already knew, in the way that sometimes you know things, before you have enough evidence to say them aloud, who was going to be on the other end of that call. He had 4 missed calls on his personal phone, 2 from the firm's managing assistant, 1 from a client, 1 from his brother, Alec. Chester and Alec Hallowell were 5 years apart, and the distance between them had never been only about age. Alec had come into the firm 12 years ago, after a long run in corporate finance that had ended poorly, and Chester had brought him in as co-managing partner out of something that was half loyalty and half guilt, because he had always made more money than Alec, always had more success. And at a certain point in a family that starts with nothing, success becomes its own kind of debt. He had told himself Alec had changed. He had told himself the firm was stronger with him in it. He had told himself a great many things over 12 years. 4 months ago, Chester's longtime paralegal had flagged an irregularity in a client trust account. Chester had investigated it quietly in the evenings over 3 weeks. What he found was not a clerical error. $47,000 had been redirected through a series of intermediary accounts to a private LLC registered in Delaware, a company with no website, no discoverable officers. Except that Chester had spent 34 years learning how to find what people worked hard to hide, and after 2 weeks he had found a name attached to that LLC. The name was Dominic Farr, a real estate developer and longtime client who had become, Chester realized too late, much more Alec's client than his. Chester had retained an outside attorney named Terrence Cook, and together they had drafted partnership dissolution documents. The signing was scheduled for Friday. Today was Monday. He had not told Alec. He had not told anyone. He pulled out his phone and called Gil Navarro, who had been his head of personal security 8 years ago, during a period when a losing client had made credible threats against Chester's family. Gil had retired 2 years ago to a farm in Lancaster County. They had spoken at Christmas and not since. The phone rang twice. Chester. Gil's voice was the same, low, unhurried, built for delivering difficult information without alarm. "Someone tried to kill me tonight," Chester said. "I'm at Meridian Recovery. I need you." A short silence. "How long ago?" Chester told him everything. The boy in the hallway, the reprinted label, the toxicology, Jonah's description of the woman, the keycard logs Dr. Rourke had pulled which showed an unregistered entry at 3:41 p.m., a staff entry door propped open for exactly 6 minutes. "When are you scheduled to be discharged?" Gil asked. "Friday." "Don't change that. Don't alter your routine in any visible way. Don't contact anyone at the firm, not your assistant, not your paralegal." A pause. "Especially not your brother." The room went very still. Chester, Gil said. Who benefits if you die before Friday? Chester set the phone against his chest for a moment and looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly. He thought about $47,000. He thought about an LLC in Delaware. He thought about the dissolution documents sitting in a locked drawer in Terrence Cook's office, unsigned. If Chester died before Friday, the dissolution never happened. Alec remained co-managing partner. Chester's portion of the firm, including his share of a pending class action settlement worth approximately $12 million, would pass through the estate in a way that Alec, as surviving partner, had significant legal leverage over. He already knew the answer to Gil's question. He had known it before Gil asked. One person, Chester said, and put the phone back to his ear. Gil arrived at 10:15, through the back of the facility with Dr. Rourke's cooperation, and met Chester in the small consultation room on the second floor. He looked older than Chester remembered. More gray, heavier in the face, but his eyes were the same. The eyes of a man who had spent 30 years deciding what was a real threat and what was noise, and who had never once gotten that distinction wrong. They sat across a small table. A cold cup of coffee sat between them that neither of them touched. Gil asked 2 questions and then listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. When Chester finished, Gil wrote a single line in his notebook and capped his pen. The woman who came into your room was hired, he said. She is not someone your brother knows socially. She is a professional. She knew your medication. She knew your room number. She knew the shift schedule. Someone gave her that information from inside your life. Alec has visited me here 3 times, Chester said. Or someone connected to Alec accessed your medical intake forms. Gil leaned back. He called you today. I didn't answer. Call him back, tonight. Be normal. Tell him recovery is going well. The doctors are pleased. You're looking forward to being back in the office soon. Gil paused. Do not mention Friday. Do not mention Terrence. Do not mention the boy. Chester pressed the number. Alec answered on the second ring, which meant he had been watching for the call. Chester, finally. I've been trying to reach you all day. Sorry. They had me in the therapy gym most of the afternoon. Chester kept his voice easy, the way he kept his voice easy in depositions, measured, nothing offered that wasn't asked for. How's everything at the office? Fine. Running smoothly. Alec's voice carried the slightly elevated warmth of someone working to sound casual. Chester had cross-examined too many people to miss it. I just wanted to check in, make sure you're doing all right. Better every day, Chester said. Doctor says I should be cleared for part-time by the end of the month. I'll probably come in and sign some of the outstanding documents when I'm back. I've been meaning to finalize a few things. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. A pause on the other end, brief, almost imperceptible. Of course, Alec said, whenever you're ready. Get some sleep, Chester said. I'll talk to you soon. He set the phone on the table. He paused, Chester said. I heard it, Gil said, already on his own phone. By the following afternoon, the woman with the scar on her jaw had been identified through exterior camera footage. A partial plate from the visitor lot. Gil's contacts ran it in under 2 hours. Her name was Tara Selby. She had a background in pharmaceutical compounding, had been terminated from a licensed pharmacy 4 years ago for a controlled substance irregularity that had never resolved into charges. She had worked off the books since then. Her rental apartment had been paid for by a shell company registered to the same Delaware LLC Chester had traced to Dominic Farr. Tara Selby was located and brought in for questioning that afternoon. She asked for an attorney. 2 hours later, her attorney asked for a deal. 2 hours after that, the deal was agreed. By 7 in the evening, Chester had been told that Tara Selby had named Dominic Farr as the person who hired her, that she had been paid $30,000, half in advance, and that Farr had provided her with Chester's room assignment, his medication schedule, and the specific drugs she needed to source and replicate. Farr had not named Alec directly to Tara. He had been, in that one way, careful, but his phone records connected him to Alec 17 times in the 6 days preceding the incident. 17 calls, the longest running 22 minutes. Alec Hallowell was arrested at his home at 9:40 that night. Chester was alone in his room when Gil called to tell him. The lights were low. The window showed a sky that had cleared after 2 days of clouds, and for a moment Chester just sat in the chair beside his bed, looking at it without registering what he saw. He did not feel vindicated. He felt something that settled in the chest slowly, the way cold comes through an old window, not all at once, but persistently. He picked up his phone and called his daughter, Renee, who lived in Seattle and whom he spoke to every Sunday evening and sometimes not at all in between. She picked up on the first ring. Dad. Her voice was careful and controlled in the way his always was, and he recognized it as something he had given her without ever intending to. "I'm all right," he said first. "I know," Gil called. "There were signs," he said. "4 months ago, I saw the account irregularities. I should have moved faster. I was trying to handle it quietly because—" He stopped, started again. "I suppose I was ashamed of having brought him in, of having looked away from things I didn't want to see, because it was easier than looking." A long pause. "Dad," Renee said, "you're not foolish. You just wanted to believe in someone. Those can be the same thing sometimes." "No," she said quietly, "they really aren't." He looked at the ceiling for a long time after they said goodnight, thinking about the difference between the two. Dominic Farr was arrested the following morning attempting to board a flight from Philadelphia International. Tara Selby's full account held through the DA's examination. The partnership dissolution documents were signed, witnessed, and filed that same afternoon. By the date that had originally been set for the signing, the arraignment was already scheduled, the chain from Tara Selby to Dominic Farr to Alec Hallowell, unambiguous and short. Chester Hallowell was discharged from Meridian Recovery 19 days later. He went home to the row house in Society Hill where he had lived for 27 years. The house his wife had helped him choose before she died. Renee had flown in from Seattle. She was staying in the guest room, and he could hear her moving around in the mornings, making coffee. And he had not realized until now how much he had missed the sounds of another person in the house. On a clear Saturday afternoon in late March, a car pulled up in front of the brownstone. Leon Favre stepped out first, straightening his jacket, looking at the house with the measured attention of a man who notices the quality of what he's looking at, without making anything of it. Then Jonah climbed out of the back seat, holding a wrapped package carefully under his arm. Chester met them at the door. He shook Leon's hand first. "You raised a remarkable young man," he said. Leon looked at his son with the expression Chester had seen in the corridor of Meridian, not surprise, but the specific recognition of a parent seeing something that had been there all along. "I know," he said, and it came out quietly, like something he was still getting used to saying. Jonah held the package out. "I made you something." Inside the wrapping was a framed photograph. A picture Jonah had taken with his phone of Fokker the corridor outside room 114, shot from the angle of the chair where he had been sitting that afternoon. The door to the room was just visible at the edge of the frame, the hallway stretching away in flat afternoon light. Along the bottom edge in careful block letters, "So you don't stop noticing things." Chester stood in his own doorway, holding the frame, and did not say anything for a moment. "Come inside," he said, "both of you." They sat on the back porch where the afternoon light came through the bare branches of the oak tree in the yard, and Chester told them what he had set in motion with Terrence Cook. There was a fund in Jonah's name that would cover the cost of any school he chose to attend, from now through any graduate degree he ever decided to pursue. There was a separate amount for Leon, enough to expand his choices, not just his obligations. Enough to matter past next year. "This isn't a reward," Chester said, "because the distinction mattered to him. You didn't act because you expected something back. What I'm giving you is for the same reason, because it belongs in the same sentence as what you did. Gratitude, when it's real, doesn't feel like a transaction." Leon started to say something and then didn't. He nodded once, the way men nod when words aren't going to be adequate and they know it. Jonah looked at Chester with the same steady eyes he had used in the hallway outside room 114. "My dad always says noticing things is part of the job," Jonah said. "You look out for the building and the people in it." "Your father is right," Chester said. "But I wasn't working that day. I was just sitting there waiting." "That's when you see the most," Chester said, "when you're not trying to see anything at all." Jonah thought about that for a moment, then nodded, satisfied. In the way children are satisfied when an answer lines up with something they already half understood. Later, after Leon and Jonah had gone, and Renee had gone inside to start dinner, Chester sat alone on the porch with the framed photograph in his lap. The oak tree threw long shadows across the yard. He had lived in this house for 27 years and had eaten on this porch hundreds of times and had rarely, he realized, actually looked at the tree. He looked at it now. He thought about what it costs to stop seeing the people around you. Not from cruelty, not even from indifference, but from the steady accumulation of forward motion that makes it easier to look ahead than sideways. He had walked past a boy sitting quietly in a hallway chair and had almost kept walking. He had brought his brother into his life's work and had looked away from every small sign that the trust was misplaced, because looking would have cost him something he hadn't been ready to pay. He had spent 34 years being very good at reading other people and had been, in the rooms that mattered most, willfully blind. The boy had been sitting there with a screwdriver and a work order, noticing everything. Chester Hallowell was 62 years old, and he thought it was probably not too late to learn something from that.